Thanks everybody for joining. I've got Chris Tuttle with me and Charlie Petrie. This is part of our best practices workshop that we've been doing. So we've been recording basically panelist interviews with customers and partners. And Chris is with ORTEC. That's one of our main routing partners. So this is a chance for us. I thought it would be a good idea to talk to people about territory planning. I know when I've talked to ORTEC in the past, a couple of their leadership folks said, most of these routing implementations should probably start with territory planning. That's kind of what happened in the past. But today's an opportunity to talk to Chris. I've known Chris for over a decade and worked with him, and he's been involved in a number of territory planning implementations. So this is a chance for us to basically interview Chris, find out what's involved in it, why people do it. We'll talk about what the structure of it is. So we've done a number of these best practices series. So we did one in March with multi-compartment routing, one in May on analytics and KPIs for bulk distribution. We did June with mobile and driver workflows. August was tank monitoring, and then November is territory planning. So I'll kind of cover the introductions, and then we'll talk about the goals, and then we'll get right into the interview. I'm Chris Henry, the host. So I'm the president of BizSpeed. We started BizSpeed. I'm the co-founder, started it in 2001. We're primarily a petroleum and last mile logistics software company. We've worked with ORTEC for a long time. ORTEC's one of our main and premier routing partners. So ORTEC is a routing company, but I'll go ahead and turn it over to Chris and let Chris tell us a little bit about your background and your role and what ORTEC does.
Thanks, Chris. Again, my name's Chris Tuttle, Director of Customer Impact at ORTEC. Been here coming up on 11 years. First 18 years of my career spent on the logistics side using optimization tools at different companies, Fortune 500s as well. And then here on the software side over the last 14, 15 years, and all on the optimization side. So started using optimization tools back in '94 and have used several different flavors from the industry and have been involved in lots of different tactical and operational and strategic projects in the past.
And you've been involved in not only bulk logistics like fuels, lubricants, chemicals, but also just normal distribution logistics like beverages, food, things like that, right?
Yeah. Food and beverage, manufacturing, 3PLs, lots of different industries as well.
Yeah. So from a goal today, our goal is really just to share best practices, talk about real world experiences. So Chris is going to talk about his experience. If you have questions, put them in the chat. We'll make sure to answer those. I know that there's a couple of questions that came in as part of the registration process. Our goal is to help you build a better logistics organization, to understand what tools and techniques are out there and when people use those tools and techniques and why they do. So this is both for our existing customers as well as it's for prospective customers. So if you're not a customer of BizSpeed or ORTEC, but you want to learn more, this is a good opportunity for you to understand the kinds of things that we bring to the table. This is going to be recorded, so obviously, don't ask anything that you don't want recorded. The topics that we're going to talk a little bit about an overview and territory planning and what it is. Then we'll do strategy, process, technology, and people. That's the same format that we've used for a number of these other ones. So maybe to get right into it. So Chris, what is territory planning?
Yeah, sure. Territory planning is really organizing your distribution work for efficient operations and balancing that with customer service. So with cost and customer service being competing goals, an organization really needs to be proactive in organizing their DCs and drivers, what we really call, the industry calls planning, so that they can ensure routes are geographically dense, but allowing for customer constraints. For example, not an exhaustive list, but delivery windows, frequency, equipment needs, and volumes. And I've always said that territory planning really organizes your work for your day of delivery operations.
I think a lot of times people think territory planning is just assigning customers to a distribution center or a depot, but it's more than that, right?
Yeah, it also involves the frequency and how to actually get a dense route on a daily basis in terms of in that specific geography that you assign that driver or drivers to as well. And then also taking to seasonality into consideration, taking holidays into consideration, taking equipment types into consideration. There's lots of different things that you can take into consideration when you're doing this territory planning.
So I know you guys have done this with some, large customers, bulk customers. Can you give us some examples of what was involved in the territory planning and why they did it?
Yeah, sure. So typically, territory planning needs to be done for distribution networks on a periodic basis, and that really the trigger for that is if you have added or subtracted customers in your network on a regular basis. So the higher the frequency of this activity of these customers being added or taken away from the network would dictate how you perform territory planning more often than not. So in the past, we've seen some beverage distributors that either go deliver to business or to homes. They have this high frequency of customer addition and subtraction. And so those territory plans we see needing to take place on a probably twice a year, where on the bulk distributors and to retail sales locations, those customer addition and subtractions are kind of on a medium frequency. So we see that maybe happening once a year. And then if we're talking about floor distributor, we've done this for a floor distributor and their new customer location, since they're only opening to distributors, that can be anywhere from 18 to 24 months on that type of cycle. So those are just some examples of how you want to consider and view looking at when and how you do territory planning.
I think part of it, it's not just for the customers, but it's also things like right sizing your fleet, right? So getting the right number of trucks at each depot,
Yeah,
because that's
you can.
part.
Yeah, you can also not only the right number of trucks, but the right types of trucks and trailers and equipment as well at which depot.
Is there, well, what tools are typically used and yeah, what tools are typically used in a territory plan?
Yeah, there's tools out of the market today that are used for specifically for territory planning, and what you want to do is that tool is usually fed by the operations data that comes out. So after your operations has operated for over a month or two or 6 months or whatever, then you can take that data and kind of consolidate that into what we call averages over a week. And then we use at ORTEC, we use our own territory planning solution to assign customers to a DC. So that gives you your DC territory. And then we assign a geographical area to a driver or drivers. So if there's enough work to be done in a geographical area that requires more than one driver, you can do that. Or you can have just one driver in a specific area. So you can make a larger territory with multiple drivers or a smaller territory with one driver. And then after that, we actually assign a day for that customer to be serviced based on their volumes and the way that they consume product. We can also use different types of readings from tanks. So if we have these averages as well, then we can consider that into the territory planning. So the solution takes into lots of different considerations, and each customer frequency volumes and time windows are different. And so these territory planning tools allow you to do what if scenarios and then compare those different what if scenarios in real time so that you can learn and understand if you're progressing in the right way. So, case in point, if you are looking to right size your fleet and you build a model that not all of your orders get delivered on the time frame that the customer indicates, that means you need to add more equipment. Or if on the reverse, if you are able to just utilize 6 of, let's say, of the 10 vehicles that you have sitting around that day, that means you have too much equipment sitting around. So it really helps you to make those kind of decisions.
I probably should have asked this, but in terms of who should implement it, or is there a company profile? That's one of the questions I know we had. So
Yeah. Yeah, I would suggest a company implement territory planning if you are regularly servicing your customers on a recurring basis and customer locations get added or removed on a regular basis. That type of customer frequency, that type of customer base will the tool will ensure that you can have the right type of frequency for your customer. I would also suggest a company that is looking to remove cross routing within a geography. So what that means is if you were to look at a map and you were to map your drivers and you see that these drivers are crossing the same paths on a regular basis, that would help to improve your overall density and reduce your miles and reduce the number of trucks that you're needed as well. Because the goal is to really bring that route density to improve customer service by also having the same driver service that same customer on a consistent basis, so they see a consistent face. So you're really balancing that customer service along with the efficiency as well.
I know when we worked with ORTEC and we've got some joint customers that are food and beverage distributors, and they route with master routes more from a territory plan. But I know that there's other customers that are bulk lubricants and fuels, and that delivery frequency and trying to get the density up is a big part of why you guys have ended up doing a territory plan, right? It's supplemental to the routing engine, the operations, the operation side.
Yeah, because what you in the bulk distribution, you have forecasting models to generate an order, and then you have your what they call reoccurring or top up or whatever it is type of customers, and so you have to be able to know which ones need to go on a frequency basis and how often they should go so that you're not over servicing those accounts either, because that just drives up your logistics costs because you're over servicing.
Yeah, I mean, I think typically we've seen the cost to make a stop on bulk logistics is at least $100 or $125 a stop, and
Yeah.
maybe like $2.50 a mile. So if you can visit somebody 45 times a year instead of 52 times a year, then that's a pretty good savings right there. So
Yeah.
um, in terms of like why it's important, like because I think so we covered what it is. Why would you tell somebody territory planning is important? And I know some of the ORTEC folks have said, a lot of these routing projects should start with a territory plan.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that territory planning really should come before the operational plan, because if you are to load your operational system or solution with how you're currently operating today, and if you're operating uh, like I said previously, where your trucks are driving by each other on a regular basis, then you're going to see some good savings from just day of optimization. But if you back it up a little bit and go upstream and then look at that and make sure that your drivers are staying within a dense area, it's important to organize that work before you start optimizing that work on a regular basis, so that you can really drive additional revenues without adding equipment. Because that's another benefit of this tool as well, is that if you are looking at organizing your work, you possibly could get one or two extra stops on your truck per day. So now you're not adding additional assets or cost to your network to increase your revenue stream as well.
I know, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but I know some larger organizations with a lot of depots also use this either to plan where a new DC depot should be, or if they should close existing ones, right? Like, because you
Yeah,
can use it to analyze how,
yeah,
what it would be like if you closed a DC and or closed a depot and just serviced them all out of another depot, right?
yeah. That's the cool thing about territory planning, is that what if scenario, which is extremely powerful, because now you can start taking a look at if you were to add an additional depot in there, because you can start looking at your length of haul. And if your length of haul gets over a certain mileage or a certain increases in percentage on however you manage that KPI, then the the territory planning tool can also create some centroids for you so that you can take a look at, hey, what if I was to add this depot or take this one away? And then it will show you your ability, the ability of a KPI on cost reduction, mile reduction, or cost increase or equipment increase, so that you can really take a look at those scenarios.
And then do you, we always talk about this on the, on the mobile and routing. Do you see territory planning done more for efficiency side or more oriented towards improving customer service?
Typically, it's on the efficiency side, but we've had some customers that it automatically improved their customer service because we saw some maps that looked like a bowl of spaghetti. It just was all over the place, and to organize that work was helping them to now consistently show up to their customer on a regular basis, knowing that they can get there with the right volume at the right time. So it's typically done for efficiency, but customer service is also a byproduct of it.
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen, we have 5 reasons why customers typically implement a routing and mobile solution, but at a high level, um, efficiency tends to be more oriented around fuel distribution, and customer service tends to be more oriented around lubricants. I don't know why that is specifically, but in general, that's what we've seen. Not that anybody would say that they don't care about customer service or efficiency, but I would say lubes tends to lean more towards customer service, and fuel tends to be
Yeah,
more around driving efficiencies. So, and then
agreed.
do you do you often see who does the territory plans? I mean, who typically is the leader of that?
Yeah, and the model that we've kind of seen recently, probably in the last, I'd say 2 to 3 years, is that we see that companies don't typically have a skill set to run territory planning unless you're a larger organization. And so ORTEC will supplement that on a short term basis and will help you to understand how to use the tool, provide the details and the results for you so that you can implement those in your operations. And then if you see that your turnover, like I talked about earlier, the addition or subtraction of your customer base is at a high frequency, you may want to start adopting that type of skill set into your own organization to then get that moving. But that obviously has to come from the C-suite because it's an investment in the organization and into the operations as well.
Yeah. And then I know I've got a few things that you and I talked about in terms of factors to consider when planning. What should people look at? Like, are there any key things? I know you've got some things listed down here, but
Yeah, so obviously the market demands across the territory is a key component because you have to consider what the customer wants and needs or is requiring at that time. Um, Product availability for customers from a DC, so you have to make sure that the product that you need to get to that customer is available from the DC that you're planning to service that customer out of, which typically in the fuels and lubes, that's typically something that's not an issue, but you want to make sure that that is there. You've got segmented customer needs and requirements, such as the different equipment types, the different days that they have to be serviced, and different time windows that are there as well, and also different address needs. Certain equipment types can't be come in or get in there or go out, so they have to have shorter versus longer, that type of thing. And then the other thing is you have to come up with some type of analytics on how do I want to model my network. And so is that using average product volumes for a certain period? Or do I want to utilize more absolute volumes, such as my Mondays and Tuesdays are light and my Wednesday, Thursday, Fridays are heavier? So you want to be able to consider that. So these you have to make sure that those types of territory tools can accommodate those type of scenarios, because if they don't, then it's not going to give you a realistic plan for your day of operations.
I probably should have asked this earlier, but I know one of the challenges that we jointly see is that a lot of people start off and they're still on paper. And so if they're routing on paper, I think it seems like it's a challenge because they don't like at that point, you don't really know exactly how they ran the routes. It's a lot of work to pull all that data together. You can't tell how long a stop took. You can't, you don't have a lot of data. But if somebody's on paper, what's the process for them? Or is it just manually somebody's got to grind through and start to collect that data? Or what do they do? Or do they start doing kind of a routing light and mobile where they can start getting some data to do to analyze?
Yeah, I think there's different levels of answers here. I think you've got good, better, and best. I think good would be to take and turn all of that paper data into all that paper information into data so that you could actually analyze it to see if there's going to be a benefit of turning your day of operations into uh, to turn it systemically so that you can start utilizing the information out of that plan. And then the better is to implement some type of mobile, right? Get orders into mobile from whatever system that is. And then the best is to have some type of day of operations planning tool optimizer. Then that feeds into mobile, and then get those actuals back and compare that plan versus actual and use that data then to go into territory planning. If you're already set up with a system for day of operations, then just collect the data and start analyzing it to then get it into the territory plan to do your what ifs.
Yeah, I know we've seen it, be a challenge when people try to do data studies and territory plans and it's on paper and it's like you can't, like, it's very difficult to tell what you're doing now because you just don't have the analytics. But that doesn't mean that you can't do it and you shouldn't do a territory plan. But, at a minimum, going from paper to an electronic system is going to start to help you become more data driven from a logistics standpoint.
Yeah. And if you're not on a system, I mean that's where you need to be, because that's where our this market is headed.
Yeah. We talked about this a little bit before, and maybe that kind of goes right into, what data is needed. So typically like in terms of the process, what data do people need to get in order to do a territory plan?
And this is the old adage, right? Garbage in, garbage out. So you really need to understand the data and how that data ties to your operations. I actually call this, you're really translating the data from operations so that you can understand how to then organize the data. So there's several categories that you need. The first one is the customer location data. That's the Latin long. That's where that customer is serviced. You need to understand their open and close times, when they're able to receive a delivery, because you may not be able to go in at a certain time because that's their busiest location. So customer data is first. After that is DC location, same thing. Understand the Latin long of that, the time windows around that, what type of product they can serve out of that, how much product they can serve out of that. Then you need to understand the equipment details, the types, the capacities. Is it gallons? Is it cube? Is it weight? Is it pallet? Is it pieces? Is it, whatever all that is of capacity? Uh, Territory planning tools can consider all of those different capacities. Even territory planning can be done on revenue. So if you're looking to actually optimize your salesmen or salespeople going out on a daily basis, it can do that as well. You need to have average product volumes or absolute product volumes by customer, and those need to be accurate and and it needs to be representative of that customer. So you may have to throw out some anomalies from that data if there was a high weekend within the year or the month or whatever. So you have to consider that. And then just the operational constraints that I mentioned a little bit earlier, that a certain customer can't take this type of equipment. A certain driver can't drive a certain piece of equipment. So all these different constraints, you want to be able to collect all of that data and make sure that it is representative of your operations as well. So they're not only collect the data, but then you do a check on it to make sure that it meets how you're actually operating today.
So customer lat long, their service windows, meaning when they can take deliveries.
Yeah.
It, I don't, is it order history or is it just average order volume and frequency?
Yeah, and that it order history then gets turned into that average product volume or an absolute volume. Just depends on how you want to model your network.
And then how often, like, what about the cost side? Do people typically use the cost as well?
Yeah,
Or,
that's also put in there. So you've got what is called an optimization cost, and then you have an operating cost. So the optimization cost is used to help influence how the tool is going to optimize. And then you have what it's called operational costs to then consider your actual operating reporting. So when you're looking at the results of the KPIs, then you know that you're measuring against either your operational cost or your optimization cost, which are two different variables. And I would say that you would start with just using optimization costs because that way, anytime you run a benchmark on it, right? You have to create your benchmark, and then anytime you change that from with optimization, it's going to produce either a lower cost or higher cost. So those are the area costs that you want to consider.
and I know you had some KPIs that I wasn't familiar with. So what are the key KPIs that you typically see with this?
Yeah. So the thing that we typically work with is miles and work hours. So those two are things that we want to try to reduce as much as possible. And the other thing that you can reduce too, and you can look at is overtime hours. So the neat thing about modeling is you can set it up in such a way that you can say, hey, I want to consider paying 1 or 2 hours of overtime per driver on a weekly basis versus starting a whole new truck and driver. So that's also some things that you can look at. And then the number of routes that you produce and versus what you are currently operating today. And then one of the things that you can look at as well is you can actually keep a KPI on what's called inter-client mileage, which means the distance between your on average between your stops, not your depot to first stop and not your last stop to depot mileage, but the inter mileage. And if you are to measure that after you run optimization, you can come up with an average. Let's say my average mileage between stops is 4 miles, and then you can put a KPI on that. So as you start adding or subtracting customers, let's say that average interclient mileage starts growing, which means that you're becoming less dense in your excuse me, less dense in your routes. Then you can start putting some KPIs or alerts around that reporting structure to say, hey, when we go from 3 miles to 6 miles, that's double in our density. So we need to start looking at that region again to get it more efficient.
Right. Yeah, because that was the one I think that you mentioned to me was the miles between stops, and and I can't remember what the term you had, like there's some density or interconnected, but yeah, it seems like that's a way to, if you can analyze it periodically and go, well, if we go from 3 miles, on average per stop to 6, then we need to go back and replan and see what we can do and maybe make some assignment differences.
Yeah.
What in terms of making the routes, like a lot of times you think of this as master routes, but what happens if people come up with a master route? How do they still accommodate call-in orders? Like, do you leave a little flexibility when you come up and assign these, or how do you do that if you?
Yeah, that's something that we've tackled in the past for several different customers. What we've had to do is you have to look at and analyze the data before you even start modeling. And so what you need to do is look at the total volume and then how that spreads across your equipment base today. And if you look at that and you're showing that you're at 100% or over 100%, then you need more equipment. But if you're showing that you're under a certain percentage, let's say you're at 60%, then you've got 40% to start working with on a regular basis. And so if we're looking for these, we call them, we've had different industries that call them different things, but the either hot shot orders or pop-up orders or call-in orders or new starts or whatever they are, you start looking at planning to an 80 or 85% or 90% capacity of either work time or capacity on a vehicle, so that you know that you can accommodate those work orders. And so you plan to the 80%, and then you then start looking and layering on the 20% to see if it will actually fit based on history. And then from there, you can take a look at, hey, will my fleet currently be able to service all of my customers based on these call-in orders?
Got it. Oops, hang on, skip through. We already talked a little bit. I'll switch to technology just in terms of timing here. We talked about your tools. Are there other tools or integrations that people need, or is it just a route, just a territory planning tool, or do you have to do integrations with other things in order to use these types of tools?
You don't have to do integrations, but 80% of the work on territory planning is getting the data accurate. The other 20% is running the models, because the heavy lifting is really done by the model, the tool, right? The solution, it runs
Yeah.
all the different optimization and spits out the KPIs for you, but you have to make sure that all that data is accurate and representative of that. And so what we recommend is having some type of reporting tool that's attached to your operating tool that will format your data for you, so that you can easily upload it into the tool. So you remove that issue, because that's one of the biggest issues in territory planning, is just organizing the data, cleaning it, and making sure it's representative to go into the tool.
Just for clarity, so when you say operating tool, you're talking about like ORTEC routing and dispatch tool set.
Yes.
Not
Yeah.
so that's what you're executing with and you're
Yep.
planning with on a day-to-day basis, whereas the territory plan is how you organize those and where they're getting service from and things.
Yeah, because your operating tool tells you what you do on a daily basis, and then from there you then organize that data to be able to be considered from a tactical perspective. And so uh, most companies most companies want to know how to do that, and ORTEC can help you organize that as well. We've been doing that for a long time.
So how do the two tools work together? Do you just export data from the execution tool? Is that typically what happens?
Yeah, typically what happens is we already have a current process that collects all that operating data, puts it into files, and then you just upload it into territory planning. And then after that, we have the ability for you to then say, okay, I want to update these customers in my operating tool. And then we basically have the ability to then review that, and then we can upload that into the operating tool. So it's a very cyclical process for us today.
Got it. In terms of people, what do you see as the biggest people challenges? Because I know this is the same thing on the execution side. Dispatchers always go, "It's all in my head. I know how everything is supposed to work." So what are kind of the big people challenges you see?
Yeah, the biggest thing that we see is moving people from being a planner to being an analyst. So what that means is that the planner or the dispatcher has everything in their head and they know all of that, but they don't know how to get that into a tool, or to maintain the data in a tool to be able to then harness the power of the optimization or the modeling from there. So there needs to be some upskilling or educating of your planners, how to automating these routing solutions to work together. So that's a really big challenge, is the education part of the people in the organization.
And what like kind of the last question, how do you overcome their resistance? Like
Yeah. So the proof's in the pudding. So it really has to be done through analytics. So you have to demonstrate the reduction of daily exceptions through planning for the dispatcher. So you have to show them that on a daily basis, the tool is going to bring X percent reduction in drivers, miles, or whatever it is, because we want to move from an opinion to really to data analytics, and that's what helps is those reports.
so what kind of questions do you get before? What are the common things that people ask? Hey, how do I know I need a territory plan? Like what do people ask about before they start this?
I, the biggest some of the biggest things that, well, they either ask or we try to help draw out is, have you ever done a territory plan before? And if the answer is no, then we know that it's going to look like that bowl of spaghetti I mentioned earlier, which I have several maps in my history files of different regions that just look like this all these cross lines. So that's the first thing. If you've not done any type of territory planning in the past, it would be something that you would want to investigate. And or if you're one of the things that we get asked a lot is, hey, we're considering for mergers and acquisitions, or we're now able to deliver to certain stores when we weren't able to before. Can our existing fleet be able to consider this extra volume without adding any assets, or how many assets can we not, how many minimal of the assets can we purchase versus more assets, in the future. So just trying to make sure that those type of business scenarios that come up, we deal with those every day to make sure that we're answering those with data and not opinions.
That's kind of a slightly different approach to it, right? I forgot about that, where if somebody's looking to expand, they try to figure out, can I, what do I need from a fleet standpoint or a depot standpoint, distribution center standpoint? They can help answer those questions, right? Or if you're
Yeah,
going to split off
yep,
part of your business, it helps you understand how to realign those existing customers.
exactly. And most of the questions that we get, which are becoming standard now, is like, does your tool consider time windows? Does it consider road speeds? All of that, all of those things that are operational uh, are in most of the latest and greatest tools. The second generation optimization tools. All of that is all those constraints, brakes, drive time, driver hours, DOT. All of that is considered in these tools.
And I think probably a big part of it too is being able to handle both bulk products, because obviously when you have, it's similar, bulk distribution is similar to food, where you have a frozen, a refrigerated, and a dry compartment. So you still have compartment routing, but you got to be able to do the compartments in order to be able to generate it. So some general tools aren't always able to really handle the bulk side, right?
Yeah, so you got to make sure that the the territory planning tool can actually handle products. Yes.
Yeah. Um, well, I think that's the end of it, and we're doing pretty good on time. So we did have one question come in, which was, how can this help calculate freight rates on fuel? I don't know if you want to answer that, or me start with what we've seen people do.
Yeah. Why don't you start, Chris?
Yeah, so that the question was, how can a territory planning tool help with calculating freight rates on fuel? And um, it depends on whether it's a transport or commercial fuel delivery. What we've seen is people will typically use the territory planning tool to help with what your overall freight costs are. So it can tell you what your transportation costs are from a terminal to a customer and back. And you generally would have that, but when you use a territory planning tool to help understand what equipment and drivers are going to service it, you can do a better job calculating that. And often, the freight rates, it's a rack price plus an amount per gallon plus a delivery fee, and you can help figure out, like often the delivery fees are based on volume, and you can use the territory planning tool to figure out what your costs are and model different volumes to understand what that would look like. So
Yeah.
it's really a modeling tool, and that's, and there is some, I don't know if you want to talk about this, Chris, but there's some level of sophistication you have to have in order to use these tools, because like you said, you're going from a planner to an analyst. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think just to add on to the freight rates for delivering of fuel is what you can do is when you model your route, it will come up with, we talked about the optimization costs and then the operating costs. So if you take that operating cost and you divide it by the number of stops that you have, this is a very rudimentary way. That'll say your cost per stop is X. And if you're charging a certain number, now you can say, oh, I'm actually above that or I'm below that. So you know right away that you either need to charge more or keep your costs where they're at, or even potentially lower your costs on that. So it can help you analyze where you're at today.
I don't think that like the territory planning tool is not looking at rack prices and contracts or anything like that. It's
No,
this is really around transportation cost and the logistics side of it.
correct.
Yeah, as
Yeah.
opposed to product sourcing. So
Chris Tuttle, we had another question came in. It says, can you speak specifically to territory planning, route optimization for TDG, which is dangerous goods?
Yeah. So with territory planning, you have to make sure that your map layer can doesn't travel. It has the setting in there so that it won't go over hazardous. There are certain roads that are closed for hazardous materials, and so you have to make sure that that is considered within your territory planning. So if you consider that, then it follows the same pattern, because now all of a sudden when you run your route optimization, that is going to not be allowed to take those roads. So it potentially increase the miles for it, and it will give you a realistic or accurate view into what that route could look like, not going on those restricted roads.
awesome. Any other questions? Somebody, Charlie, you want to get those? Somebody raised their hand.
Yeah, that was the question that was,
Oh, okay.
we just took care of the one Q&A.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Well, if I'll send this presentation out to everybody that registered, and then if anybody has any questions, you can certainly contact myself or Charlie or Chris Tuttle and ask them. So this is good, Chris. We really appreciate it. This is one more part of the data-driven logistics company. A continuous improvement process. So, our goal with these is really, like I said, for us to help customers understand what tools are out there and how people use them and how to continuously improve to be a better data-driven logistics company. So this was awesome. Thanks for doing it. And if anybody has any questions, you can send them in via email as well. So
Thanks, Chris.
awesome. Thank you.